Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2008 science fiction horror film Alien Raiders. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on this film, I would like to give a special shout out to Steven for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would personally like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal or to my Patreon. The link to both will be in the video description down below, and I will try to get to your request as soon as I possibly can. Now, Alien Raiders is one of those films that I was aware of it because I saw the trailer for the film, I think, before one of the movies that I blind bought years ago. And I thought, okay, it could be some fun. I like the concept, I like the idea, and saw this for cheap somewhere and decided to pick it up. And after finally seeing the film, in all honesty, it was pretty disappointing. It was a movie that I would say isn't entirely terrible. I don't think this was an awful film. I do think that it has some merit, and I think there are some elements of it that do work. But because of a lot of factors, the film just winds up being another run of the mill, forgettable, direct to video horror thriller. That's really what it winds up being. It winds up being pretty generic and pretty dull. And it's unfortunate because I think it starts off rather well, but once it really starts to delve into the entirety of the film's plot, then it just progressively gets more and more generic and more derivative. And it starts to be less engaging and gets just to be pretty boring, to be honest. With only like a few bits of gore and maybe a little bit of suspense to perk you up. Now, the film was directed by Ben Rock, and this is a guy who, prior to directing this, he worked as a makeup effects artist. So he did a lot of effects work for various different films. And his experience in that field definitely does show with this movie when it comes to the scenes that feature practical effects. But his lack of experience also shows when it comes to other areas of directing. And I know that for first time director, you can't always expect them to knock it out of the park or do a remarkable job uh, right off the bat, so to speak. But his direction, other than maybe a handful of scenes, is pretty unimpressive. And it really does hurt the film in a fair amount of sequences. For instance, there are scenes in the movie that deal with moments of supposed like intensity or suspense or thrills involving infected hostages who are freaking out because of the alien that's inside of them, and the alien is taking over. And these scenes, instead of coming across as thrilling or scary, they come across as laughable because of just how poorly shot they are. For whatever reason, Ben decided to shoot the majority of these scenes with shaky cam and quick cut editing and a ton of slow mo. And what happens is it comes across less like something that adds to those scenes, and it comes across like an inexperienced director just throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. And it just isn't very focused. And it just seems like it comes at random because there are certain scenes with these creatures that aren't shot that way. And then there's other scenes that are. There's no consistency. And so it really is something that hampers the film visually. Also, when it comes to scenes where he's trying to show these characters in a more emotional light or show some semblance of drama, the direction is also pretty flat. And it's just one of those movies where also he decided to shoot the film with a lot of dark lighting. So you lead to scenes, this leads to scenes, excuse me, where you kind of have a hard time seeing what's going on in the scene. So it's just one of those films that the directing is not particularly dynamic overall. And I could really see why Ben Rock was not asked to direct again after this. He did some music videos and some short films after this, but he never really directed a feature film again, even a direct to video movie. And when you look at what he did here, it's understandable. Now, the film features a screenplay by David Simpkins and Julia Fair. And David Simpkins is actually the writer of the original Adventures in Babysitting, of all things. And that's a much better script than what's provided here. This is a screenplay that has an interesting concept, but it ultimately fails in execution. So you have a good opening that pulls you in with a fair amount of intrigue and a little bit of tension, where you have this opening first like 10 to 15 minutes as takes place inside the supermarket, and what looks like a gang of thieves who are taking people hostage and just killing people indiscriminately. It turns out that they're not necessarily just criminals. There's more to them, and that what they're doing is they're taking extreme measures to try to help people because there's some sort of alien infection that's going around, and they're trying to take out these creatures who are burrowing themselves or inhabiting other people, and I mean burrowing themselves into other people. My mistake. And they're trying to find this king. And if they kill the king, then they stop the spread of the alien organism, because there's nothing to fertilize the females and so on and so forth. And so they heard that the king was somewhere in this market, so that's why they're doing what they're doing. That's why they're shooting some people. That's why they're taking all these people hostage. There's these police that are on the outside who are also trying to communicate with this group of rogue scientists. And one of the hostages happens to be the stepdaughter of the main officer, who's the head of the unit that's trying to solve the hostage situation. And so there's a little bit of tension there. And where the script really starts to falter significantly is when it starts to become derivative of other much more superior films, specifically John Carpenter's The Thing. There is a point in this film where Alien Raiders just becomes a Thing ripoff, and it's just not anywhere near the level of that movie, so it comes across as insulting and lazy. And it deals with this scene where the scientists are doing this test on people to see who is infected. Like The Thing. Where McRady gets the gang together and gets blood samples, and everyone's tied to a chair, that kind of thing. And just like The Thing, they do their test. Somebody freaks out and attacks a bunch of people. They have to take it out. And it's just one of those things that's like, really? Like, you're just going to rip off The Thing now? And it just continues down that path for the most part. And when it's not doing that, it's just so bland and boring in terms of its character development. I find it funny that some of the interviews on the behind the scenes footage for this movie talk about how the characters are such a strong suit when it comes to this movie. And I'm like, what film are they talking about? Because the characters are not a strong suit with this movie. They don't have much charisma, they don't have much personality. The writers do attempt to try to provide them with some depth, especially with the lead guy. Like, they provide the lead guy with depth, Aaron Ritter, but a lot of it's just you hear that he had to kill his wife because she was infected at one point. You get little snippets, little bits of backstory for these characters, but you don't get it until pretty far on into the story. And that's because it's trying to, be mysterious at the beginning. And I get it. I understand that thought process. And I think if the rest of the script worked better as a whole, then maybe this would actually add to the screenplay. But for me, it's actually another detriment to the script because it just feels like too little too late when it comes to trying to salvage these characters. Because they come across as too much like a typical series of criminals who are just killing people without a second thought, who are just ruthless. There really doesn't seem to be, from the very beginning, really any elements that make you sympathize with these characters, make you connect with them, and let alone want to root for their cause. And I get it, that's why they're painted that way, because they're trying to set things up with a switcheroo and they're not who you think they are, and the hostages are not who you think they are too. But it just is something that, to me, in theory, it's not a bad idea, but the way that it's executed is just not good. And I think if you had a little bit of like an introduction to these characters, maybe just a simple scene in the beginning where they're just kind of hanging out with each other and just having some fun banter back and forth while they're while they're in the van driving to the supermarket, then you might be able to really swerve the audience, because you start out with these characters and you start to kind of get to like them because of this little road trip that they're on, and get to know these characters, their different quirks, their different personality traits. And then they wind up at the supermarket and then they start robbing it. And then you're like, what the hell? Like that would definitely be something that would throw the audience for a loop better to me, and would also still maintain some semblance of care for these characters, and also would help with the mystery, because you're like, okay, why are they doing this now? I didn't see them doing this. It didn't seem like they were on their way to rob a supermarket and start shooting people. What is going on here? But instead, they just start things off right in the middle of the action with not really any genuine depth or character development for any of these characters. So when all of this stuff starts to go down, you don't really have as much tension as I think you really should have had. And it's just one of those movies where, yeah, it's really a screenwriting problem with this film. The direction is not great, but I think with a better script, it could work a little bit more in the long run. I just didn't care. And that's a serious problem when it comes to a story. You have to care about these characters. You have to genuinely want them to survive. Otherwise, you just have a pretty dull story because there's no real emotional investment. And for these writers and for the people involved with this film to say It's like a tribute to John Carpenter's The Thing. To me, that's a slap in the face because that film actually cared about character development. It cared about creating characters that were engaging, that were likable. So then when all of the horrible things start to happen and the thing starts to reveal itself, there is a legitimate amount of suspense, a little legitimate amount of suspense and tension, which you don't get with this screenplay because you don't care about these characters, and in the end, you don't really care about their plight either, despite how high the stakes apparently are. The hostages aren't much better either, so that's another problem. Either they're unlikable or they are just boring. There's not really much else when it comes to those characters. And then when you get to the twists, they are incredibly predictable. Like the final twist at the end, like if you've seen a fair amount of horror films, you're going to see that one coming a mile away. That's another thing that was pretty funny to me when it comes to behind the scenes interviews where they were talking about the writer I think was talking about, well, I hope that you know this isn't one of those endings that you see coming a mile away. I'm like, yeah, it was actually. So maybe you should have tried a little bit harder when it comes to your twist ending, because that was blatantly obvious for anyone that was paying attention. And it's also another one of those scripts and stories that, okay, it's inspired by John Carpenter's The Thing, but it got the wrong idea when it comes to other key elements of that movie. And one of them was how it's able to balance levity with intensity and with horror. There's next to no levity in this, except for maybe a few lines of dialogue from one of the hostages. Other than that, everything's taken way too seriously. And that just makes it so it's not really that fun to watch. You're taking it way too seriously, like it's an episode of Law and Order or some shit. And I'm like, this is called Alien Raiders, right? Can you have some fun with the concept? Can you have some fun with what's going on here? No, it's too dour most of the time. And the seriousness just comes across as laughable and like it's completely unearned. Especially when it comes to like the drama at the end when Ritter he dies and it's supposed to be tragic and heartbreaking, and I'm like, I don't give a shit because I didn't really care that much about that character to begin with. Or that other scene earlier on in the movie where this character named Kane, who is an absolute asshole, he's an irredeemable piece of shit for the majority of the runtime. Now you're supposed to sympathize with him because he's dying. I'm like, I don't give a fuck. That guy's a douchebag. He was just a jerk. He was just a fucking jerk off for the majority of the movie to all the hostages, was a bully, and I'm supposed to care about whether or not he dies? No, that's not how this works. And the only other characters that kind of gave a little bit of a shit about was like Benny and Whitney, and that's really about it. Everyone else was just nothing in terms of your investment in them. And that's just that's one of the biggest problems of the movies. Just the characters are just so poorly written and utilized throughout the majority of the story. And it takes itself too seriously when it really shouldn't, considering the kind of film that it is. And there's other elements that are just kind of more confusing than anything else. Like there are various different moments in this movie where you will get the equivalent of found footage. Some random footage that the cops are watching on a camcorder, some other moments here and there, like during the opening credits or during little portions of the film that are just random flashes of found footage. And some of them are even like shot in night vision, which makes it equally as dubious and just strange and just ill-fitting. And it's also a story where there's not a lot that happens for a good chunk of the running time. Just a lot of people just talking and then more talking and establishing what honestly seems like non-existent character depth most of the time. There will be like maybe an alien freak out at one moment, and then it'll be relatively short. There'll be a few little bits of shootouts like early on in the film, but then there'll be long stretches where there isn't any action. There's not a lot of raiding that's going on in this Alien Raiders movie. The most raiding it does is raiding John Carpenter's The Thing for plot points and script elements. The cast the cast is actually pretty good. The cast is doing the best they can with what they have to work with, which is not much. But Carlos Bernard, it's not a bad performance by him as Aaron Ritter. I just was very indifferent on his character. But it's not a bad performance at all. I think it's actually the arguably the best performance in the movie. Matthew St. Patrick as Seth Stedman. He's also not too bad either. Uh, he plays the police officer on the outside who is trying to solve the hostage situation. Rockman Dunbar's Kane. He played a good asshole, but he didn't do a very good job making it the character sympathetic. But at the same time, I think that actor would have been capable of that if he was given that in the script. Courtney Ford is Sterling, another character that is just painted in a way where she's just unlikable for a good chunk of the movie, but then they try to make her into a sympathetic figure and it just doesn't fit. But her acting isn't bad when she's supposed to be emotional or supposed to be sad or devastated, like when she has to kill Ritter at the end. But it's still not what I would consider to be uh, a sterling performance. Jeffrey Lycon as Benny. I liked his performance. I felt that it was the most authentic out of all the performances. There really weren't a lot of moments where it seemed like he was really trying a bit too hard to act here. Just felt very natural, and I connected with him too because he works in retail, and he opens up the film having to pick up a dirty diaper out of a shopping cart, and throughout the film he has this arc where he stands up for himself and is telling his boss to essentially fuck off. And so that character I felt was one that had a lot for the actor to work with, so that's a good reason why the performance is one of the ones that stand out in a good way. Samantha Streets is also fine as Whitney. Doesn't have a lot of screen time, but I think that she and Jeffrey Lycon, they were a pretty decent pair. Then you also have like Derek Bosco as Manny, Benita Fredericki as Charlotte, Brian Krasner as Moody, Keith Hudson as Chambers, Joe McCrary as Tarky, a few other actors and actresses. Um, but it's really not really what I would consider to be a like an A tier cast. But there really isn't what I would consider to be a genuinely bad or poor performance out of everyone here. Uh, so I would say consistency wise, the performances by the actors in this are probably some of the best things about it. Other than some of the practical effects, they had a really low budget to work with, but I think they got a good chunk of that and utilized it rather efficiently with the practical effects, the makeup effects, especially of the creatures and the uh the infected guy who they think that is the king. It was a cool idea to have the creature like burst out of their chest and essentially like burrow itself into their neck and like mutate the body and just and just be a different sort of way to showcase an alien infection by having it burst out and be visible. The creature is right there, and so it's not one of those things where it's just inside and then comes out every now and then. Like it's always bursting out. I actually thought that was a pretty cool idea for a alien. The cinematography by Walt Lloyd, I would say that might be like the best thing about the film visually. I don't even know if the direction by Ben Rock is really the reason why the film has as many good-looking shots as it does in terms of the establishing shots or some of the shots of the empty shopping uh center. It's not really a center, but you know the empty market. Um I think it might have to do with Walt Lloyd. Then you have the music by Kays Al Atrachki. The score, for the most part, is relatively generic, like the majority of the movie, but there's some original songs that are used that I didn't mind. I will say this though, the decision to have like a good chunk of the first half of the film just have nothing but the same annoying instrumental version of Jingle Bells play on the loudspeaker at the market was a really bad call. That was so annoying. And it didn't help either that there would be times where you would have a scene that's supposed to be a little more intense and you'd have a bit of music that's trying to evoke that kind of feeling, but then you would still hear the jingle bells in the background. And I was just like, oh my God, can you turn that shit off? Turn it off. For fuck's sake, it was just playing on a constant loop over and over and over and over again. And I definitely do feel that the film still has some pacing issues despite it being 85 minutes. It's not a long film, but it feels like it's longer than that because of the fact that the characters are so weakly written. The film is so derivative of other better movies, and there's just not a lot of consistent engagement in when it comes to what's happening. So there are a lot of moments in the movie where it just drags. You're just waiting for something to happen, some sort of burst of blood or guts or gore. And to be honest, there isn't a lot of that. There's a little bit here and there, but it's not really a gore fest. And the director said that he would have done it more if he had more of a budget. And I'm like, practical effects aren't always something you need like a massive budget to pull off. So I think it's kind of an excuse. Or maybe or maybe he said something about time, like I've had more time. Well, I don't know, maybe stop spending so much time shooting boring scenes of plot exposition and shoot more scenes with shit happening. How about that? Then maybe then you would have time to have more blood or more gore or just have more fun with the overall idea. It just really was a letdown to me. So it started off decent, kind of caught my interest, and then it just went completely downhill after that. Thanks for watching my review of the film, and until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.